And now, Chapter 11 of Last Boy on Earth, The Entrance to the Underworld. You must be swift and decisive, Brady. Don't linger anywhere. Make your way to the hospital, find her, and return here as quickly as you can, Ben counseled Brady as he donned his various belts, vests, and weaponry. Well equipped with all manner of tools and assistive devices, he looked like a post-apocalyptic poster child. He was the Batman setting out to prowl Gotham, bent on finding the Joker's lair. He was Beowulf sitting out to find a particular cave, wherein dwelt a foul beast. Both eyes open, Ben, he said, pointing to his own eyes with the horn symbol he made with his left hand that he had seen 1,000 times on music television. And one foot in front of the other. That's the spirit, Brady. Find her and liberate her. Remember, don't engage the beast unless you must. Got it, replied Brady. Just as he opened the door, the great black form of Hugin flew into the library. He had never been in the building before, and he was visibly flustered, flying around the main room for a moment before settling on the main desk, croaking and flexing his satin wings back and forth. Hugin, did you see her? Brady inquired. The great raven crackled and croaked what seemed to be a positive response. He had done as he had been asked. He had been to the monster's den. I wish I could understand you, Brady said in frustration. The autobiography of Benjamin Franklin spoke. I can understand him, Brady. He has information that will help you. Rushing to the main table at the front of the main room, Brady put both hands on the book and asked, Well, what does he say? The bird began to remonstrate and flutter its wings in agitation. After a moment of noise and motion, he settled back into his usual proud raven stance and began preening his feathers casually. Ben translated. She is on the high. I think he means the top floor. The man-thing has trapped her there, but he cannot get to her. He said that the man-thing has left the doorway to the building unguarded. You can walk right in. No dog things either. But he says that the city is red and hot, full of smoke. Brady, the city, it's burning. Brady walked to the window, cracked it open, and took a deep breath. You're right. And why do I have this feeling that he's trying to smoke me out? You're worried that this might be a trap? Ben asked. Could be, answered Brady. I have to go anyway. Hey you, Brady said, pointing to the great raven. Want to fly over there with me and be my eyes in the sky? Hugin made himself big and opened his wings, letting out a long, complicated crackle. Again, Ben translated. He says, It is my way. The bird flew to his shoulder and settled there. Brady turned to leave when Ben said, Brady, if the library should burn down, would you do me a favor? Brady hadn't thought about the library and its fate in the fire that was now blazing through the city, unchecked. Yeah, Ben, anything, answered Brady. Well, find another library and make contact with me again. Will you do that? Asked Ben. Can I do that? Replied Brady. Well, I certainly hope so, my boy. Now, off with you. With that, Brady and Hugin ventured into the coal red night. Hugin took flight as Brady brought Rocinante to a full roar down the road towards State Street. Before taking to the road, Brady donned the gas mask that he had used so often when investigating the houses of the dead. In those circumstances, he hadn't wished to smell the odor of death. Tonight, it filtered the smoke from his nostrils, but also limited his vision. Rocinante's headlight had a strong halogen bulb, but the smoke was filling the city, wafting in waves through the skies, down the streets, and up into an ever-reddening night. When he made it to the intersection of State and Broadway, he saw the devastation from the top of the hill. Wind and rain, fire and smoke animated the entire view with motion. Flickers of fires combined with flashes of lightning, and the smoke, like dark nebulae, obscured the fires at the very edges of the city. Brady hoped that the fuel storage tanks down by the river would escape the conflagration. It seemed like Brady's world was quickly destroying itself. All of his carefully mapped caches of food, his supply depots, his map full of renamed places and things, All were being erased and consumed by flames. Bangor was burning as it had done 100 years ago. All he could do was hope the brewer would escape the fire and remain a safe haven on the opposite side of the great river. He held Rocinante at full throttle down the center of State Street toward the entrance to the underworld. Hugon was barely a yard in front of him the entire way, pumping his wings and struggling to maintain his lead. There it was, Eastern Maine Medical Center. In its day, more people worked in that building than in any other building for 200 miles. It had been the last place in the country that had held out against the virus. Brady recalled vaguely that Central Maine had been one of the last places to be stricken, and one day his mother had come home and told him that the bigwigs from the Centers for Disease Control had just set up shop there. Accompanied by a military contingent of the Maine National Guard, all measures to stop the spread of the virus were now centered out of this building. The whole of the United States health system had been reduced to a control center in the eastern part of the nation, a small dot on the map in the middle of a vast forest that is, or was, Maine. Hugon swooped down and caught his attention, as if to say, "This way, boy, the doorway's this way." And Brady turned Rocinante down the street and into the main entrance of the complex. Large concrete barriers blocked the road, behind which lingered the forgotten dark green hulks that were troop carriers and supply vehicles from the Maine National Guard. Brady was used to entering the facility the way he had always done when his mother brought him to work to do such things as collect her check or eat in the cafeteria. And Hugon was leading him in another direction, however. He was flying to the right, near the river, and away from the main complex. It was the Weber Building, a large addition to the hospital with 7 floors of doctors' offices, laboratories, and meeting rooms. Brady vaguely recalled the main lobby, accessible by its own set of glass doors. Hugon had settled on a railing near the doors and made a raucous cry, lowering his head in a signal of urgency. "This is the door," he seemed to say. Was Brady beginning to understand him? Was he beginning to read Hugon's actions and motions, his intonations of sound? Brady turned on the headlamp he wore on his forehead. He still donned the gas mask with his headlamp, and he looked like some sort of alien astronaut freshly landed on a strange new world, unsure what he would encounter. He had another long black flashlight mounted on his paintball rifle. Around his waist was a belt with knives, ammunition, other flashlights, a first aid kit, a coil of rope, and a variety of tools he might need in a pinch. Over his shoulder was slung the katana he had taken from the Maine Military Supply Company. He didn't know how to fight with a sword, but he thought that, like so many things he had learned lately, he might be forced to learn. He stopped in his tracks when he saw his reflection in the windowed door. Who was this warrior descending into the belly of the beast? Who was this child Roland mounting the 1,000,000 steps toward the dark tower? Who donned this war gear and walked the path of danger toward an uncertain end? Frozen by how much he had changed in the last weeks, he considered that he was unsure of his own personality. There in the glass was a post-apocalyptic freak, a figure from a Tim Burton stop-motion animation, a comic book hero. Who was he to face the beast and save the maiden? The hallway was a large space. Chairs and couches that served as waiting areas were clumped in groups against the walls in favor of beds, cots, and makeshift emergency medical stations. Everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of the abandonment. There were no bodies that he could see, but there were discarded medical supplies, syringes, drips, bedpans, in short, all the debris of a medical disaster. Everything was in disarray. The long hallway was mostly glass, and it faced the great river just below. His own light sources, along with the ambient glow of the fires in the distance, caused shadows to flicker, illuminating different sections of the place, and causing him to work diligently to find his way to the stairwell. His plan was to find her, whoever she was, and get her out of this place, and it wasn't sophisticated. Like Beowulf descending into Grendel's cave, he went with one purpose, and that was to put one foot in front of the other until he faced the creature. He had little time to prepare his rescue plan, especially after Susan's plaintive plea to hurry. He'd find his way to the highest floor, and since the 2 buildings were connected, he would make his way to her vicariously, from the side. He hoped he wasn't too late. And there was the doorway, clearly marked with the word stairs. Brady realized that this must be how the monster navigated through the place, but he had to use the stairs too. He couldn't climb on the outside of the building. The elevators didn't work. There was only one way. He ascended each step with caution, his eyes scanning in observation mode, investigating each shadow and shape, attending to every sound. Higher and higher he climbed, past the first 3 floors. On the 4th floor he saw evidence of a struggle. Broken glass littered the landing from the small window and the heavy steel door that led to the main floor. The door handle had been sheared off, probably with a heavy hammer, and from Brady's perspective it seemed as though whoever had done this was seeking a way into the floor and not away from it. Was this his first evidence of the monster? As he approached the topmost landing, he heard a growl and a shout of frustration. The sound was coming from behind the doorway that led to the stairwell. And Brady turned off his flashlights and stopped as he listened to a series of thrashing sounds of items being thrown and smashed, muffled their way through the heavy steel door. He crept to the steel wire reinforced window and looked through, seeking the cause of all this sound. The creature behind the door worked in nearly total darkness. Brady surmised that the beast must have night vision like a cat. He took off his gas mask, meaning to don his own night vision goggles, when the odor of death, so concentrated and intense, hit him, causing him to gasp and stagger. He scrambled to put the gas mask back on his face to regain his wits. The odor was so powerful it seemed alive, and he wondered, is this the smell of dead bodies, or of the monster? While he regained his senses, the monster on the other side of the door continued its shouting and cursing. Brady assessed the situation. If he was supposed to save her, he'd better do it soon, even though he had no clear idea how this was to be accomplished or even who she was. He didn't dare look for long through the window and the door, but from several glances he could picture the beast in his mind. It was very tall, perhaps 9 feet, perhaps more. Its limbs were massive, with what Brady thought of as a comic book proportion, shaggy, not furry, and it had a massive head. Bony spikes protruded from its spine and clicked against each other as it moved. He couldn't see the creature's face yet. Truly, it was the largest, most frightening living thing he had ever seen, like a vision from a nightmare or a scene from a horror movie, taking its frustration out on a wall that it hammered with 2 closed fists. "I am coming for you," shouted the creature. There has to come a time, Brady thought to himself, when you just have to go one way or the other. Either move forward now and risk everything, or skulk back down the stairs, out into the fire and the darkness, and forever wonder what would have happened if. There has to come a time, Brady. He removed his mask and took in a deep breath, steeling himself for the battle that was sure to come. He didn't flinch from the fetid odor of death that permeated everything in the place. Brady opened the door and quietly slipped through as the creature hammered its anger upon the wall, its back still to him. It hadn't hurt him as he entered the room over the sound of its own frustrated pounding. If the creature succeeded in breaking down the wall, Brady knew that he would have access to his prey. Susan had been emphatic in her plea. He had to save her now, on this night, at this moment, or the creature would succeed and all that had been the world would end. The history and future of all humanity hung in the balance. Brady holstered his paintball gun and slipped the paintball rifle to the floor, realizing the futility of his weapons against such a fearful opponent. From his leg sheath he withdrew a long knife. In his other hand he had a canister of pepper spray. He knew that he couldn't kill this creature, not here, not now, but he might hamper its progress long enough to save her. He kept hoping that she was his mother, the person he wanted to see more than anyone else. Finally, the creature sensed Brady's presence. It stopped its assault against the wall, and Brady heard from the hulking form a deep but nearly silent laugh. Bracing himself for the fight of his life, Brady watched intently as the creature slowly turned to face him. Beyond all reason, the creature faced the boy, towered over him as a colossus, and Brady's eyes grew wide when he beheld the head and face. It was enormous and surprisingly amorphous, ever-changing. The dimly lit room was bathed in splashes of electric light emanating from the fierce storm outside, and Brady could see first one face and then another form and dissolve. First, there was a face that looked like Adolf Hitler with fangs, and then Darth Vader, Emperor Palpatine, Marilyn Manson, the xenomorph from Alien, Predator, the Terminator, Lord Voldemort, and the substitute teacher he had in 4th grade. There was a succession of faces that lingered but a moment and then morphed into something else. "You," said the creature quietly, as though pleased. His voice sounded like a discordant chorus of reverberating tones. He was 100 broken bells, 1,000 shattered mirrors, 1,000,000 stars about to die. The beast spoke with a small amount of amusement in its otherwise anger-filled voice. "I did not think you would ever come to me, renamer. I'm your death," mouthed the monster. A small seed of bravery germinated in Brady when he said, "No, I've come to destroy you." Brady was surprised by his own words. Did they emanate from him or from Jack the Giant Killer? Was this the giant that Don Quixote met on the plain before he toppled off his horse so ignominiously? The deepest of laughs from the belly of the beast came to his lips, and he laughed again, and this time truly bemused by Brady's words. "We shall see, my boy. We shall see." They stood face to face for a long moment, measuring each other. An onlooker might have thought that the boy couldn't stand a chance against such insurmountable odds. Brady moved his index finger over the top of the pepper spray and felt a little foolish to think that something that was a mix between a mutant rhinoceros and a superhuman alien monster from an 80s-era DC comic could ever be affected by something so inane. In one fluid moment, he threw the can at the creature and reached far over his head to withdraw the katana from its sheath on his back. He raised it as high as he could and brought it down at the monster's face. Grendel dodged the blade's swift flight with the agility of a feral creature and quickly moved behind Brady, grappling him with an enormous clawed paw. "So easy, then, after all," mouthed Grendel in satisfaction. "One little moment of excitement, and it's all over. So unfortunate." Brady brought the knife he had been holding in his other hand down onto the leg of his assailant. The blade only went into the flesh of the muscle a few millimeters, but it was enough to cause the creature to cry out in anger, and what Brady could only assume was shame. He let Brady go for an instant, but it was long enough for him to slip away. Brady had never been an A student in phys ed class, but he was strangely agile tonight. In fact, he found himself to be as agile as he wanted to be, almost like he could summon prowess at will. And as he ran down the hallway and away from Grendel, he could sense the monster close behind. Over gurneys and counters, behind rolling carts, and past scenes of previous disarray, obviously caused by Grendel on previous attempts to find her, they buckled and grappled. Brady was slippery and lithe, and his blade made many cuts in the flesh of the creature, but they only seemed to draw more strength and speed from Grendel. Brady hoped to draw attention away from her long enough to aid in her escape. He could see the monster gaining on him, almost at his throat, with his swinging pendulous arms, sharp claws like bowie knives, scorpion tails brushing his back as he moved away. Grendel was Medusa, and Brady was Perseus. Grendel was the Minotaur, and Brady was Theseus. Grendel was Darth Vader, and Brady was Luke Skywalker. "Run, run as fast as you can't catch me, I'm the gingerbread man," shouted Brady, taunting the creature as he slid underneath the bed and then out the other side. He had little time to assess, but he was now in a new mode he had never experienced before in his life. He was in observational mode no longer. He was moving with speed and determination. Engagement mode. "Come on," he thought. "Wherever you are, run for it. Get out of here." With Grendel at his back, Brady found himself at the end of a corridor with nowhere left to run. The monster's bulk slammed into the floor with each footfall as he approached Brady, whose sword was already held out perpendicular to his body, grasped with both hands, legs apart, ready. As the monster was within arm's reach, Brady brought the blade down as hard as he could. Grendel's elephantine fist blocked the blow, and in one movement caused the blade to fly from Brady's hands onto the hallway floor far behind them. Pinning Brady against the cement wall, crushed by the force of the creature's body, his lungs barely able to gather enough breath to stay conscious, Brady turned his head away from the stink of the creature's foul breath and the glowing red glare of its amorphous eyes. They were both very quiet for a moment, each attuned to the other's breathing and awaiting the next thing. Outside the window to his right, in the direction his head was turned, he could clearly see most of the city was now on fire. Huge sheets of flame roared and licked their tongues upward to the darkness of space, just as Grendel's own tongue began to slide from one side of its gaping maw to the other. Finally, the face started to take shape and gain solidity. It was a human face, except that its features were overstated and outgrown, like a mutant, stretched from a normal-sized skull to cover one twice or 3 times its original size. "Why?" Brady managed to gasp a question. "Why do you want to kill me? How can I be any trouble to you?" "You are human. You remain when the others have all fallen. You are a son of the light, and I would tear down the sun. That is all," was Grendel's response. "Haven't enough people died already?" asked Brady through his grimace of pain. "Not until you are both gone. Then enough will have died," responded Grendel. "I'm not afraid of you," Brady asserted simply. "You should be. I know who you've come for. You want your mother, don't you? I knew her. Did you know that? She was one of those unfortunates who worked in this house of death. Before she died, she suffered, like you will. She was brave, boy. You should be proud of her." Brady looked deeply into the eyes of the creature, seeking the truth of things. "You're a liar!" Brady screamed. "She isn't dead. She's alive, and I'm here to save her." The monster laughed. "You've put up a good fight, boy, but you're too late. She died weeks ago, along with the others. I should know. I killed them all, every last one of them." "No!" Brady screamed, but the beast had already begun making its final move upon the struggling body of Brady Smith. "I know you don't believe me," the monster continued, "but to prove it to you, I will let you hear her final words." Then, nearing the doorway of death himself as the monster pressed hard against his throat, he heard his mother's voice coming from Grendel's mouth. She was saying, "What about Brady? God help him. Oh, my boy, Brady." Her voice broke into a weak stream of cries and whimpers. The beast spoke again in its own sandpaper and gravel voice. "I'm many things, but I'm not a liar." The creature took its massive hand and began to raise Brady by the throat high up against the wall, tightening its grip. Brady found one hand free and thrust it into his trouser pocket. "Finally," said Grendel, through self-satisfied, gritted teeth. "Not so fast, asshole," shouted a voice from behind the monster. Brady couldn't see who had spoken, but he felt the creature loosen its grip on his throat, and then, ultimately, Brady fell slumped against the floor. Grendel screamed in pain. The darkness was heavy, but the lightning storm, which had been reaching a frenzied level, revealed a form to Brady that would remain forever in his mind's eye. The monster had whirled to face his attacker, but had also fallen on one knee, and from his vantage point, Brady could see one long, 3-foot gash deeply cut into the monster's back, blood seeping and flowing from the wound and spurting into the spiky protrusions. There she stood, the mighty Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, her gray eyes and black hair falling down upon her shoulders. She held the katana in front of her and perpendicular to her frame like a veteran warrior, and she was advancing upon the monster, all the anger and hatred of the world concentrated in her powerful gaze. She didn't speak. Her action spoke louder than words. Brady could see that the creature would only be down for a moment. Withdrawing the item from his pocket, he pointed it at Grendel and fired. The taser hit the creature and released its electrical fury into the body of the beast, causing it to rear up and then fall to the ground, shivering and twitching. For a moment, it was down. Brady arose and ran at the girl. He grabbed her by the arm and said firmly, "Let's go, now, before he gets up again." Strangely, she didn't want to leave. Brady could see the determination in her eyes, feel the firm, tense muscle of her arm as she clenched the sword with an almost desperate firmness of purpose. He squeezed her arm more tightly, and she turned to look at him, and if looks could kill, Brady would have been a dead man. "This ends now," she said. She sliced down at Grendel's right hand, cleanly cutting off the monster's fingers. Still immobilized by the taser, she could see the pain welling in the monster's eyes. She raised the sword for another strike, but Brady held her arm and looked into her eyes. She wasn't his mother. The disappointment he felt over her loss was intense, but was countered by his curiosity. Who was this mysterious, powerful, angry girl? Please, you have to listen to me. I know. I just know. We have to leave. Now, before he recovers. He gets stronger every time we wound him. He gets knocked down, but he gets up again. Now, come on, let's run. She looked at him, and in a second that lasted longer than 100 years, she lowered the sword and nodded in assent. The girl was the first one into the stairwell. Before following her, Brady took one last look at the monster. Already he was beginning to rise from the floor and pursue them. They had to be the essence of speed to escape him. They held on to the handrail and jumped down the stairs, nearly falling down to each of the landings. The creature was only one floor above them. He called out in grief and pain with each step he took, but even with his bulk and wound he was gaining. The girl was like a bird, her feet barely touching the floor as she held the sword carefully at her side, moving like flowing water. She was water, Brady thought. How could she be water? Brady was less lithe now and found himself less adept than he had been only moments before. The speed and agility he had summoned were leaking out of him, and he was slowing down. He followed the girl into the main lobby toward the glass door that led out into the conflagration of the burning city, but away from this prison, and that was when he realized that he was bleeding. There was a gash in his leg about 4 inches long. He didn't remember receiving the wound. It must have happened in the struggle with Grendel. He was feeling dizzy, and the world around him began to slow down into a smaller and smaller spiral. "Come on," the girl said. She held out her hand, sensing that Brady was having some trouble navigating. He took her hand, and they made their way to the doorway as Grendel exploded through the stairwell door and began to lope towards them, running on all fours. Each time he put weight on what remained of his right hand, he screamed a little, and once he stumbled and crashed into a pile of medical supply boxes and wheelchairs, which gave the fleeing pair just enough time to reach the doorway. Brady was barely able to walk, but the girl seemed to have superhuman strength and put her shoulder under his, nearly carrying him out. As she ran up the walk and away from the building, the last thing Brady saw was the angry form of Grendel, pressed up against the glass of the doorway, his anger as tangible as the rain and as hateful as the fire that now consumed the city around them. End of chapter.